Previously, we saw how the len function gives us a type error when we give it a number instead of a string. So let's talk a little bit more about data types and functions. And the way I think about functions is kind of like some sort of fancy machine that you might see in a factory, right? So in this case, we've got some sort of machine that's going to take potatoes into chips. And we don't really care how it does it, but it's probably going to have to peel the potatoes, wash the potatoes, cut it up, fry it, and then finally return it to us as an output in the form of fries. And if this is the first time that you're watching one of my tutorials, this is probably a health warning. I talk about food a lot. So be prepared if you haven't eaten. Now, let's say that we took the same machine that normally processes potatoes and we decide to give it a rock. And we just pass this through the function, then we're going to get an error, right? This is basically what happened here. This length function doesn't like working with integers. And by forcing this through, we end up with an error and our code breaks. And it gives us this thing, a type error. Now, if we hover over this yellow warning, we also get the explanation here. Expected type, something called sized, and got int or an integer instead. So this is already pretty clear where our mistake is, even before we hit run. And the other helpful thing is when you hover over any function in PyCharm, it gives you the definition of it. And in between the brackets, you can see the data type that that function expects. So the length function expects a data type with something that's called sized. And we can actually click on this link to see the documentation on docs.python.org, which is the official Python documentation. Now, I know previously I told you to try using something like W3 Schools or using Stack Overflow. And the reason is because the documentation from the official Python organization is very, very short. So sometimes it can be enough, but very often I find that it's helpful to find another source to back up this very, very brief explanation. But in our case, in this situation, it does help us. For example, it tells us that len will return the length, which is the number of items of an object. And the argument, which is what you put in between the brackets, may be a sequence, such as a string, byte, tuple, list, or range, or a collection, such as a dictionary, set, or frozen set. Don't worry about these other data types that we haven't come across yet. We're going to come across them in due time, and we're going to be learning all about them. But for now, you already see one that you recognize, which is string. So it can take string, but nowhere in this list does it say it can take an integer or any other number data type. So as the first pause exercise, I want you to fix this len function so that we actually give it a data type that it recognizes, and we fix this type error so that when we run it, it works as expected. And you can put anything in there as long as it gets rid of the warnings and errors. Pause the video now. All right, this should be relatively easy. We can change this to any string, which we already know is a data type that this function can accept. So we can simply change it to hello or whichever string you can think of. And now when we hit run, all our errors and warnings should now go away. If you see something like pep8 blank line at end of file and it bothers you, don't worry about it too much, but it's basically saying that in an ideal situation, a Python file should only have one blank line at the very bottom. So if I hit run again, that will clear up that warning. For everybody out there who has a little bit of OCD like me, this can be a lifesaver. So now that we've seen that in Python, each function expects to work with a specific set of data types. So there's only certain data types that can go into the parentheses of a particular function. Now, here comes the question. Well, how would we know what data type a particular piece of data has? So how would we know what is the data type of hello? Well, it's very easy to visually see it because it has the double quotes around it, and anything with double quotes around it, even if it's a number, is in fact a string. But there is also one function in Python that allows us to check the data type of any piece of data or variable. So all we need to do is to use the keyword type, and then in between the parentheses, we can put in any piece of data. It can accept any data type, and then it will give us in return the data type. But as always, in order to see it, we have to wrap this inside a set of parentheses and use the print statement to put this into the output area. So let's run that, and you can see it tells us that this is something called a class string. So this is basically saying it checked the data type of this piece of data we gave it, and it told us that it's actually a string, which is what we expected as well. So we can do this with various different data types. Let's check it with a number. Well, in this case, we gave it a whole number, so no decimal places, and it told us it's an integer. We could do this with floats, with booleans, and it will always very, very helpfully tell us what is the data type. And this is something called type checking. So now it's time for another quick pause check to make sure you understood what's going on. I want you to write out 4 lines of code to print out the 4 different data types that we have already learned about. So it's going to be the string, the integer, the float, and the boolean. And we want all 4 of these printed out in 4 lines in the output area using what you've learned and the correct data type to put in inside the parentheses for the type check. So pause the video now and give this a go. All right, so we've got already the integer type. So let's put the string one above it. And we know that all strings go inside a set of double quotes. And then we want a floating point number. So we could do 3.14. And finally, we want a Boolean type, which we know is either true or false with a capital T and capital F. So now if I hit run, we should see class string, int, float, and bool, the full collection of all the major primitive Python data types that we learned about in the last lesson. If that was confusing at all, review the last lesson, and hopefully this all makes perfect sense. Now, what if we aren't happy with the assigned data type? What if we want to convert a piece of data into a different data type? Well, then we would need to learn about something called type conversion, also known as typecasting in Python. So let's go ahead and clear the board to make this less confusing. And let's start out with a very simple string. So we all know that this is a string because it's enclosed in a set of double quotes. But what if I wanted to turn it into an integer? Well, I can use one of the built-in functions called int, and I can convert this into a number. So whereas previously we saw that if we tried to print the string 123 plus 456, then we would end up with 123456. And because both of these pieces of data are string data types, the plus sign does concatenation instead of maths and adding these two together. But now that we've converted this 123 into an integer, you can see that if we replace this string with this typecasted integer, and we could do the same for 456, now if I hit run, you'll see that it actually treats them as numbers and adds them together. So this is the power of type conversion. Now, one of the dangerous things about this is, of course, sometimes you can't convert things into a different data type. For example, if I tried to convert ABC into a number, well, that doesn't really make sense. If I gave that to you, what would ABC be as a number? I don't know. So if we run this, you can see we get something called a value error. So I hope you're collecting these errors in a notebook somewhere, because we're coming across lots of them, and you will come across more in your lifetime as a Python developer. So this is saying that there is an invalid literal for the int, which is ABC. And so it doesn't really make sense to convert this into a number, is what it's trying to tell you. So you have to be really careful when you're doing type conversions, because sometimes you can end up with errors and sometimes you can just simply lose data. But we can use this method to convert things into all of the 4 major primitive types that we've learned about. So we can convert to an integer, we can convert into a float, we can convert into a string, and we can even convert into a bool. So to check that you've understood how to convert between different data types and why we get different type errors, I have a final pause challenge for you, which is to make this line of code run without errors. So I want you to go ahead and copy this line of code, paste it into your code file, and try to hit run. Now go ahead and enter a name triggered by this input, and then you will see that you get a type error. So read through the type error, see if you can understand what it's trying to tell you, and fix this code so that it does what you expect it to do, which is to print out the number of letters in the name that the user submits into the input. Pause the video, give this a go. All right, so in order to break this problem down, let's use some variables to simplify things and make it easier to read. Let's take this second part of this print statement and let's take it out into separate variables. So we know that we can get the name of the user by using this input function. And I'm making these variable names extra wordy just so that when you read it, it makes a little bit more sense. And I'm actually going to delete the rest of this as well, just to make everything easy to read. So next we need the length of name. And this is done by using the len function, and we pass in the name of the user that we got from line 1. So now finally, what we have here is the length of the name, which we want to tag to the end of this print statement. Now, what is this error trying to tell us? It's saying you can only concatenate string to a string, not an integer, which is what it sees in this line of code. So where is the integer? Well, we know that when we calculate the length of something, it gives us a number, it gives us a whole number. So this is probably an integer. Well, we can verify this by using a type check, right? We can print the first part of this concatenation and we can put it inside a type function to check what is the data type of this first part. And then we can also check the data type of the second part, which is now called length of name. So let's comment this out. Let's go ahead and run this code, enter a name, and you can see the first one is a string and the second one is an integer. So this is a type string and this is a type int. So now it makes sense that when we're printing, we can't simply concatenate a string to a number. It doesn't know how to do that. So how can we convert this length of name into the same data type as this first part, which is a string? Well, you learned how to do that already. All we need to do is to wrap this inside a set of parentheses, which is the string type conversion. And so now we have this part, which is now a string, and then we add it to another string. And now if I run this code again, then you'll see that it works without any issues. Number of letters in your name, 6, printed out. So hopefully this makes sense to you and you'll be able to understand in the future how to do type conversions and how to understand when you have different type errors, what has gone wrong.